The night was heavy, a blanket of darkness pressing down on the streets like a secret waiting to be exposed. The city seemed to hold its breath, the faint hum of distant traffic, and the occasional rustle of leaves, the only sounds breaking the eerie silence. But in the quiet, there was a tension, a flicker in the air that foretold something inevitable. A collision was coming, but no one could yet see it. A young black teenager walked alone down the cracked sidewalk, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie, the low hum of the streetlights casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and grow as if alive. In his arms, he cradled a small, trembling puppy, his companion in a world that often didn't show him kindness. The dog, still too young to understand the harshness of the world, whimpered softly as it looked up at him with innocent eyes, oblivious to the danger that was fast approaching. As the teen moved forward, a distant siren wailed somewhere down the road, momentarily breaking the stillness. He quickened his pace, unaware that just around the corner, the nightmare was already taking shape. A police car turned onto the street, its headlights blinding in the dark, a predator hunting its prey. Inside the car, the officer's eyes scanned the surroundings, sharp and cold. He was used to these streets, used to seeing faces that didn't matter. But tonight, everything would change. The car slowed as it approached the teen. The officer's gaze hardened when he saw the hoodie, the dark skin, the boy, and the puppy. His mind, programmed by years of prejudice and bias, immediately began to form a story, a threat, a problem to be dealt with. The officer's hand twitched toward the radio, his voice cutting through the night like a blade. "Stop right there." The words hung in the air, the command as cold as the night itself. The teen froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know why he was being stopped. Didn't know the officer's mind had already been made up long before this moment. All he knew was the sudden fear that wrapped around him, squeezing the air out of his lungs. "Get out of here, kid," the officer barked again, his voice low and commanding. The teenager hesitated, the unease spreading through him like ice. The dog in his arms squirmed, sensing something was wrong, but the teen held on tighter, trying to reassure it with a soft murmur. "What's your problem?" the officer demanded, stepping out of the car. His boots hit the pavement with a sharp thud. The tension in the air thickened. The boy's mind raced. Should he run? Should he fight back? Every muscle in his body screamed at him to move, but his feet were frozen to the ground. And then it happened. An explosion of violence so fast, so brutal, it felt like the world itself had cracked open. The officer lunged forward, his hands grabbing the small puppy from the teen's arms, with a force that left no room for protest. The boy barely had time to react before the officer flung the helpless creature to the ground. The sickening sound of the puppy's body slamming against the pavement echoed in the night, sharp and unforgiving. The teen's scream ripped through the silence, a raw, agonizing cry that shattered the calm of the street. But the officer didn't flinch. He didn't care. To him, this was nothing more than another display of control, another assertion of power. The teen dropped to his knees, his eyes wide with shock, the world around him spinning. The puppy lay there, motionless, its small body crushed, its life snuffed out in an instant. His heart broke as he reached out, his hand trembling, but the officer was already backing away, his eyes filled with contempt. "You'll learn your place," the officer sneered, turning to walk back to his car. But the teen wasn't listening. His world had just shattered, and he had no idea that this moment, the crushing injustice, the death of his companion, would set in motion a series of events that no one could have predicted. He wasn't just another kid in the street anymore. He was about to discover that he was someone far more important than he could ever imagine. And nothing, not the officer's cruelty, not the weight of the world, would ever be the same again. The darkness seemed to close in on him. But in the pit of his stomach, something began to stir. An ember, small but burning with fury. The night didn't end with the officer's departure. It couldn't. The teen stayed on the pavement, his body numb, his heart a thundering drumbeat in his chest. The puppy was dead. He couldn't bring it back. It had been taken from him so violently, so ruthlessly, and the cruelty of it burned through his veins like fire. The world felt unreal, like everything was wrong, like everything he had been told about fairness and justice was a lie. The boy, still kneeling on the cold concrete, looked down at the lifeless body of his dog. His hands were shaking, but he couldn't bring himself to move. The weight of what had just happened was too much. He had no words, no way to describe the agony tearing through him. His chest felt hollow. He could still hear the officer's sneering voice in his ears. "You'll learn your place." The words echoed through his mind, slicing through the numbness that threatened to take over. It wasn't the first time he had felt this sting, the sting of being treated like nothing, of being nothing. He had lived through years of looks, sneers, and whispers. The cops, the teachers, even the people who claimed to be his friends. They all saw him as less than human, and this was just the latest proof of it. He stood slowly, wiping the tears from his eyes. His hands were still trembling, but this time, it wasn't just from shock. It was from the anger bubbling up inside of him. He glanced down at the puppy one last time. It had been his only friend, his only light in a world that never stopped punishing him for the color of his skin. The boy stumbled to his feet and began walking. He didn't know where he was going. All he knew was that he couldn't stay there. The streets felt like a cage. The people walking by didn't even look at him. Not a single one stopped to ask if he was okay, if he needed help. He was invisible. Always had been. As he walked, the cold wind whipped through the streets, biting at his skin, but it couldn't freeze the fury inside of him. He passed by a store window, and the reflection of himself caught his eye. He didn't recognize the face staring back at him. His eyes were dark, wide with grief, but there was something else now, something darker, a shift, a change, a hunger. He continued to move, mind racing, heart pounding. He had never felt more alone, yet more determined. He had no idea how or even why, but something inside him had cracked wide open. It wasn't just about the puppy anymore. It wasn't just about the officer's violence. It was about everything, the constant weight of his life, the burden of being looked at as less than, of never being seen for who he truly was. The boy knew he couldn't live like this anymore. He couldn't just take it. The rage started to rise in his chest again, and this time it felt different. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something more, something fierce and untamed. He walked faster now, purpose in his steps. He needed to get away, to make sense of this. But he also knew something else. He couldn't let this moment slide. He couldn't just forget it. Not this time. Not when he knew what was at stake. As he passed a corner, he spotted a group of white teenagers laughing and talking. They saw him, and the laughter faltered. One of them, a tall, gangly kid with a smirk that screamed arrogance, leaned against the wall and called out to him. "What's up, little man? Lost your puppy? You look like you could use a hand. Or maybe you're just used to picking up after yourself. Figures." The words stung, cutting into the teen like a knife. But they weren't new. He had heard them all his life. Whispers, sneers, words designed to remind him of his place. The difference now, though, was that he was done. Done being their punching bag. Done being their joke. The group laughed again, oblivious to the storm raging behind the teen's eyes. They didn't know him. They didn't understand what this world had done to him. But they would. They would all learn. He felt his fists clench. His body was tight, every muscle screaming with a desire to lash out, to make them feel the pain he had been carrying for so long. He took a step toward them. His voice, when it came, was low but clear. "You think it's funny?" The words left his mouth with more force than he expected, and the group fell silent. The kid who had spoken first raised an eyebrow. "What? You gonna cry about it? What's your problem?" The teen didn't say anything more. He just stood there, breathing heavily, fists clenched at his sides. For a moment, it felt like time itself stopped. His chest rose and fell, the fire inside him threatening to consume him, but something else stirred within him too. Something more dangerous than the anger. He wasn't just standing there anymore. He was calculating, moving pieces in his mind, planning his next step. This wasn't just about the cruelty he had endured. This was about reclaiming everything that had been stolen from him. The group started laughing again, oblivious to the growing storm inside the boy. But this time, he wasn't going to take it. Not anymore. And as the moon cast its cold light across the street, the teen realized that this night, the night that began with a simple act of violence, would change everything. They wouldn't see him as invisible anymore. He wasn't a nobody. Not anymore. He was going to make them remember his name. He was going to make the world see him, not as the kid in the hoodie, not as the stereotype, but as something far more dangerous. Someone with nothing left to lose. The boy's heart was still pounding, his body tight with tension, as the group of white teens continued to laugh at his expense. Each chuckle, each sneering word, felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of the world's cruelty, of the way it always saw him, always reduced him to nothing. He stood frozen in place, eyes locked on the gangly kid who had started it all, the one with the smug grin that never seemed to fade. He could feel his pulse in his ears, louder than anything else. He wanted to move. He wanted to strike, to show them that he was more than just a target. But instead, he took a slow, steady breath, willing himself to stay calm, to hold it together for just a little longer. But then, the kid spoke again, his voice dripping with mocking pity. "You know, I didn't think you people knew how to take care of pets," he said, his words cutting through the air with an edge that made the other teens snicker. "Maybe you should stick to rats. You'd probably do better with those." The laughter erupted again, cruel and loud, echoing through the empty streets. The boy felt his chest tighten, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. That comment, "you people," it was a phrase he had heard his entire life, a phrase meant to strip him of his humanity, to remind him that no matter how hard he tried, no matter how good he was, no matter how much he deserved better, he would always be seen as less. Always. His vision blurred, his body trembling as the rage built inside him, suffocating him, drowning him in a sea of frustration and pain. The words cut deeper than any physical blow could have. The memories of all the times he had been humiliated, overlooked, treated like a second-class citizen, flooded his mind. The countless times teachers ignored his hand raised for help. The times security guards followed him through stores, just because of the color of his skin. The times his own classmates had whispered behind his back and treated him like dirt. His entire life had been a series of small humiliations. But now, with this one act of violence, this one cruelty from the officer, from these teens, he knew that he had reached a breaking point. And he wasn't going to stand by and take it anymore. He wasn't going to let them define him. "You think it's funny?" The words were a growl, low and dangerous, escaping before he could stop them. The teens fell silent, their laughter faltering for a brief moment. But the kid with the arrogant grin didn't back down. He smirked even harder, if possible. "What's the matter? Can't take a joke?" he said, the condescension dripping from his words. The others chuckled weakly, sensing the shift in the air, but the boy didn't care. He was past caring about their mockery. He took a step forward, his breath coming in quick bursts. His body was shaking, but not from fear. It was from the power he felt rising inside him, a power that he had been denying for so long. The power of knowing just how worthless they saw him, just how easily they tossed him aside. But that power, that knowledge, it wasn't going to break him anymore. The gangly kid took a step forward too, trying to push his dominance, trying to make the boy feel small. "Come on, man," he sneered. "Are you going to cry now? I didn't know people like you could even get upset over something so small." The word cry was like a dagger. It was the final straw. In an instant, the boy moved. His fist shot out faster than he thought possible, catching the kid square in the jaw. The sound of the punch echoed in the night, and the kid staggered back, hands flying to his face, eyes wide in shock. For a moment, everything was still. The other teens stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The boy's chest heaved, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had never hit anyone before. But in that moment, it felt like the world had shifted. He had taken something back. The kid stumbled, his hand still on his jaw, and glared at the boy with a mixture of confusion and rage. "You hit me!" he spat, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes blazing with fury. "You fucking hit me?" The boy didn't answer. He didn't need to. His fist was still clenched, his body still shaking with the adrenaline coursing through him. But the teens weren't laughing anymore. They weren't mocking him. They were afraid now. And that was something new, something that felt more powerful than anything he had ever felt before. The gangly kid stood up straighter, his hand still pressed to his face, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "You don't know who you're messing with," he muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. The boy stared at him, eyes cold. "I know exactly who I'm messing with," he said, his voice low and calm. "And you should be scared." The group didn't say anything else. They exchanged a few uneasy glances, and the tension was thick in the air. The boy stood his ground, refusing to back down, refusing to let them see him as weak. His heart still pounded in his chest, but now it was no longer from fear. It was from a different kind of strength, a strength born from knowing that he had finally stood up for himself. The group backed off, muttering to themselves, clearly not sure how to handle the situation. The boy watched them go, his mind racing. This moment, this small victory, was only the beginning. He had made them see him. He had made them feel what he felt. And that taste of power, of control, was like a drug. The world wasn't going to just pass him by anymore. He was done being invisible, done being silent. He was going to make sure that from this moment on, everyone would know his name. And they would all remember the day they had underestimated him. But as the group disappeared into the shadows, the boy's mind began to shift again. It wasn't just about the humiliation he had faced from these kids. It wasn't just about the punch he had thrown. It was about something bigger, something deeper, something that went all the way back to that moment with the officer. The rage was still burning inside him, but it wasn't just personal anymore. It was a fire that he could use, a fire that he would turn into something dangerous, and no one would be able to stop him. Not anymore. Let's take a brief pause here. We'd love to hear from you. Please share in the comments where you're listening to our story from, if you've ever experienced something similar in your life, or just let us know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling chapters. Now, let's continue. The night seemed endless. The streetlights flickered, casting long, broken shadows across the concrete. The air was thick, charged with something heavier than the oppressive humidity. The boy's breath came in short, ragged bursts as he walked, each step feeling heavier than the last. His fists still throbbed from the punch, but the satisfaction he had felt moments ago was beginning to fade, replaced by something darker, something more insidious. He didn't feel victorious anymore. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt alone. A fierce wave of isolation gripped him, stronger than any physical pain. The world didn't care about his anger. It didn't care about his rage. It didn't care about what he had just done. All that mattered was that he was black, that he was poor, that he was invisible. And in this moment, standing on the same old streets, everything that had ever been taken from him seemed to come crashing back. The looks from strangers, the whispers in classrooms, the hands on him at stores, the unsaid words that lingered in the air whenever he entered a room. "You're not one of us. You don't belong here." His footsteps grew louder as he walked faster, unable to shake the overwhelming feeling of being chased by something he couldn't escape. He had taken a stand. He had fought back. But at what cost? Would they see him now? Would anyone? As he turned another corner, he saw a familiar face up ahead. It was one of the officers, the same one who had brutalized him hours earlier. The boy's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly ducked into an alley, hoping to avoid another confrontation. But it was no use. The officer spotted him immediately. "Hey, you!" The officer's voice boomed down the street, filled with contempt. He was alone this time, but the boy knew better than to believe that meant safety. The officer moved closer, his uniform making him seem even larger, more menacing. "You're the kid who thinks he can just punch people, huh? Think you're special?" The words hit like a slap. The boy stood his ground, refusing to back down this time. "I'm not your punching bag," he said, his voice steady despite the growing storm inside him. The officer's face twisted into a sneer. "You think anyone cares about what you think? You think you matter?" His words dripped with disdain, with hatred. "You're nothing, kid. Just another thug looking for trouble. The boy clenched his fists, feeling the anger surge within him, his body taut, his teeth grinding together. He had heard these words 1,000 times before, from the people who passed by him every day, from the ones who would never see him as anything more than a nuisance. But hearing them from the officer, from someone who had sworn to protect, made it hit harder than anything else. The officer took a step forward, towering over the boy now, his voice low and threatening. "You know, you're not welcome here. People like you never are. We're just trying to keep the peace, and you—" He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You're a problem. A disease." The boy felt his blood run cold, but he didn't move. He wouldn't give this man the satisfaction of seeing him flinch, seeing him cower. Instead, he met the officer's eyes, his own filled with a quiet but undeniable fury. "You think I'm the problem," he said, his words biting. "No, you are. You and everyone who thinks it's okay to treat people like they don't matter. Like we don't matter." The officer scoffed, stepping even closer, his face inches from the boy's. "You think you're some kind of martyr now? Some kind of hero because you threw a punch?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the alley walls. "You're nothing. Just another angry kid with no future." The boy's fists trembled with rage. The officer's words were meant to break him, to remind him of his place. But this time, they didn't. This time, something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was aware of the system that had built this world, that had built him to be nothing more than a target. And for the first time in his life, he realized he wasn't just fighting back against the officer. He wasn't fighting back just for the injustice of his own life. He was fighting for something bigger. He was fighting for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The officer's eyes were wild with frustration now, his fist clenching as if he might strike out. "You don't get it, do you? You'll never be one of us. You'll never be good enough. You'll always be beneath us. You'll always be lesser." The boy stood tall, unmoving. He didn't need to respond. He didn't need to say anything more. He had already made his point. He was done being the victim, done being the one who apologized, who shrank in the shadows. The officer took another step forward, his hand reaching out as if to grab the boy. But just as his fingers brushed against the boy's shoulder, the sound of sirens filled the air, echoing down the street. The officer froze, his face hardening as he looked up, realizing that backup was coming. Without a word, he turned on his heel and walked away, muttering curses under his breath, disappearing into the shadows. The boy watched him go, his chest heaving with the aftermath of the encounter. But as the officer disappeared from view, the boy felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Power. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't just another nameless kid in the street. He was someone, and no one, not even the officer, could take that away from him. He stood there for a long time, breathing deeply, his mind racing with everything he had just endured. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but for the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he had the power to make it stop. The night was far from over, and the boy was ready for whatever came next. The city had a way of swallowing people whole, making them feel small, like they were nothing more than dust in the wind. The boy had always known that, had always felt it in his bones. He had spent his life on the fringes, invisible to the world, just another face in a crowd that only saw his color, never his humanity. But something had changed. Something deep inside him had awakened, and he was starting to see that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to accept the world's cruelty anymore. The weight of what he had done earlier still hung in the air. He had stood up to the officer, defied him, and in that moment, the boy had felt a spark, a small flicker of something powerful. But now, as he walked through the empty streets, the adrenaline was beginning to wear off. His mind, which had been so focused on the officer's words, began to wander again. He thought about the punch, about the sneer on the officer's face, about the way the world had tried to break him down again and again. But it wasn't just about the officer, not anymore. The boy wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every person who had ever been oppressed, for every person who had been told they weren't enough. He was fighting for everyone who had been made to feel small, to feel less than. And in that fight, he was starting to see how deep the roots of racism and hatred went, how tightly they were woven into the fabric of society. He walked through the alleyways, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The city was empty now, most people inside, trying to stay safe from the violence that loomed just outside their doorsteps. He'd never felt more alive, but he also felt like he was drowning. There was too much anger, too much hatred, swirling inside him, and he didn't know how to control it. But he didn't want to control it. He wanted it, wanted the power to make things right. As he turned a corner, he saw a familiar figure standing in the distance. It was the same officer from earlier, the one who had humiliated him. He stood on the sidewalk, leaning against his patrol car, his arms crossed over his chest. The boy's heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was the officer here to make good on his threats? But the boy didn't flinch. He had already made his decision. No one was going to push him around anymore. He wasn't the scared kid anymore. He was someone with a voice, with power, with a fire inside that was only growing stronger. The officer saw him, and his eyes narrowed, a sneer twisting on his lips. "I thought I told you to stay out of my way, kid," he called out, his voice dripping with contempt. The boy didn't respond. He didn't need to. He just kept walking, his eyes locked on the officer's, refusing to let himself be intimidated. The officer took a step forward, but the boy didn't back down. He kept moving, slow but steady, his heart pounding in his chest. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" The officer spat, his voice rising with anger. "I'll make sure you regret this." The boy stopped just a few feet away from him, and for a moment, everything went silent. The officer's face twisted into a mask of rage, but the boy could see the fear behind the anger. The officer was scared of him now. He could feel it in the air, and that realization gave him strength. "You're nothing," the officer hissed, his voice shaking with fury. "You'll always be nothing, just another troublemaker, another piece of trash we have to clean up." The boy's eyes flickered with something dark. "You're wrong," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not nothing, and neither are the people you've been oppressing. You're the one who's nothing." The officer took a step forward, his hand reaching for his baton, but the boy was ready. His hand shot out, grabbing the officer's wrist before he could draw it. The officer struggled, but the boy held on, his grip tight, his fingers digging into the officer's skin. "Let go of me, you little—" the officer began, but the boy cut him off. "You're not in control anymore," he said, his voice low and cold. "You don't get to dictate who matters and who doesn't." The officer's eyes widened, and for a moment, the boy could see a flicker of fear in his eyes. The officer tried to jerk his arm away, but the boy held firm. He was done being the victim, done being the one who was constantly pushed aside. It was time for the world to see him, to see everyone like him. "You think you can treat people like animals?" The boy's voice was sharp, each word cutting through the night like a blade. "You think you can just walk around, bullying people because of the way they look, because of the way they live? You're nothing. You've always been nothing." The officer let out a growl of frustration, but the boy didn't let go. He didn't back down. He couldn't. "You think I'm just another troublemaker," the boy said, his voice growing colder with each word. "You think I'm nothing but a statistic. Well, I'm not, and I'm going to make sure you never forget who I am." The officer's face twisted in anger, but the boy saw something else in his eyes, a hint of desperation. The officer had spent so much of his life looking down on people, thinking he was better, thinking he was untouchable. But now, the boy had taken that power from him. For a long moment, they stood there, locked in a silent battle. The officer's hand still twitched toward his baton, but the boy wasn't afraid anymore. He was done with fear, done with being invisible. Finally, the officer jerked his wrist out of the boy's grasp, his eyes burning with rage. He took a step back, straightening his uniform, trying to regain some of the authority he had lost. "You'll pay for this," the officer spat, his voice venomous. "You'll regret ever stepping out of line." The boy didn't flinch. "No," he said quietly, "you're the one who'll regret this, because the world is changing, and you're not going to be able to keep up." With that, He turned and walked away, his back straight, his heart racing, but no longer from fear. This was just the beginning. The officer's words didn't matter. The system's cruelty didn't matter. For the first time in his life, the boy realized he wasn't just a victim. He was a force that the world had never seen before, a force that was going to change everything, and nothing was going to stop him. The city was waking up as dawn began to break, casting long, cold shadows across the streets. The boy, walking with a newfound determination, could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him, but it was no longer crushing. It was fueling him. The officer's threats still echoed in his mind, but they were no longer words of power. They were the last gasps of a dying system, a system that had been built to suppress, to silence, to break people like him. But he wasn't broken, not anymore. As the boy walked through the quiet streets, he thought about everything that had happened. The punch, the officer, the anger that had bubbled inside him and spilled out in that moment of confrontation. He had made a choice. He had stepped into his power, and it had felt liberating. But there was more to this story. There was more to this fight. The world wasn't just about the individual struggles. It was about the collective fight. The fight of every black person who had ever been looked down upon, stepped on, ignored, and degraded. It was the fight of every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, who had been treated like an outsider in their own country, in their own city. And that realization made his chest tighten with both pain and resolve. He wasn't alone in this. He never had been. The struggle he felt, the rage that surged within him, it wasn't just his. It was theirs too. And if he was going to keep fighting, he needed to bring them with him. As he moved deeper into the city, the streets grew more crowded. People were waking up, starting their day as if nothing had changed, as if the world wasn't burning with injustice just beneath the surface. He passed a group of young men, standing on the corner, chatting among themselves. They didn't pay him any attention at first, but as he drew closer, their conversation died down, and the whispers began. "Look at him," one of them muttered under his breath. "Thinks he's something special now." The boy didn't break his stride. He knew what they were thinking, knew the looks they were giving him. He had been here before, too many times before. But today, he didn't feel small. Today, he felt bigger than their whispers, bigger than their scorn. "You got a problem with me?" the boy asked, his voice low but clear. The young men looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. One of them stepped forward, a tall, broad-shouldered guy, trying to puff himself up in front of the others. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh? Some kind of tough guy? You ain't nothing. Just another angry black kid who thinks the world owes him something." The words hit harder than they should have. The boy could feel the sting of their judgment, the weight of the stereotype hanging in the air between them, but he refused to let it get to him. He had spent his whole life fighting this narrative, fighting the idea that he was just another statistic, just another angry black kid who didn't know his place. He wasn't that kid anymore. "No," the boy said, his voice steady. "I'm not an angry black kid. I'm just a kid who's had enough. And you know what? So, have a lot of other people." The young man scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Yeah, sure. You gonna start some revolution or something?" The boy didn't respond. He didn't need to. The revolution wasn't just about fists in the streets. It wasn't about shouting and demanding attention. It was about something deeper. It was about reclaiming power, about no longer accepting the labels they tried to place on him, about demanding that his humanity be seen. The young men laughed, shaking their heads, clearly dismissing him. But the boy didn't flinch. Instead, he turned and walked away, feeling their eyes on him as he disappeared into the crowd. He had made his point. He had shown them that he wasn't going to cower in the face of their words. He wasn't going to let them define him. But as he walked further, the noise of the city around him faded into the background. His thoughts turned inward, to the officer he had faced earlier. He had stood his ground, but now the boy could feel the lingering weight of the encounter. The officer's words still echoed in his mind. "You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. Just another troublemaker, Another piece of trash we have to clean up. The boy closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Those words had haunted him for years. It wasn't just the officer's hatred. It was the hatred that had been baked into the world, into the system that had been built on the backs of people like him. It was the hatred that had been passed down from generation to generation, the hatred that told him every day that he didn't belong. But now, the boy wasn't listening to those words anymore. He wasn't going to let them define him. Not today, not anymore. He was more than the world's hatred. He was more than the label they tried to stick to him. He was something they could never understand. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice calling out to him from behind. "Hey!" He turned, and there, standing across the street, was a woman. She was older, maybe in her mid-30s, with a stern but caring look on her face. Her eyes were locked on him, and there was something about the way she looked at him that made him stop in his tracks. The woman crossed the street, moving toward him with purpose. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders." The boy didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to people asking about him, really asking about him, not like this. "I'm fine," he said, his voice coming out colder than he meant. "Just tired of people thinking they can walk all over me." The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yeah, I get that," she said. "You know, the world's been trying to break people like us for a long time. It's a system, a whole damn system that's built on tearing us down." The boy looked at her, a mixture of surprise and curiosity in his eyes. "You know about that?" She smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I've lived it," she said, her voice low. "I've seen it, been through it. I've been knocked down so many times I can't even count. But every time I got back up. Because the truth is, they can try to break you, but if you don't let them, they'll never win." The boy's chest tightened as her words sank in. This woman, whoever she was, understood. She understood what it was like to be broken down, to feel small, to feel like the world was telling you you didn't matter. She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto his. "Listen, kid," she said softly. "You've got something in you. I can see it. Something that they're afraid of. You've got a fire inside you, and you need to use it. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for all of us. And trust me, they know it. They're scared of you. Scared of what you could do if you really believed in yourself." The boy felt something stir within him, something deeper than the rage he had been carrying for so long. This wasn't just about anger. It wasn't just about fighting back. It was about reclaiming everything they had tried to take from him. His dignity, his humanity, his voice. "I'm not sure I know how to do that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to fight this fight." The woman smiled again, her eyes softening. "You already are, kid. Every time you stand up, every time you say enough, you're fighting. And you don't have to do it alone. None of us do." The boy nodded, a sense of resolve settling in his chest. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't control. He felt like he had a purpose, like he was part of something bigger than himself. "You're right," he said, his voice steady now. "I'm not alone." The woman gave him a nod, then turned and began to walk away. "Keep your head up, kid. They'll try to break you, but don't let them." As she disappeared into the crowd, the boy stood still for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. He wasn't alone. He never had been, and now, more than ever, he knew that the fight wasn't just his. It was theirs, and he was ready to lead it. The weight of the woman's words stayed with him long after she had disappeared into the crowd. "You're not alone. Keep your head up, kid. They'll try to break you, but don't let them." He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that until she said it. The pressure he had been carrying, the years of bitterness and anger, suddenly didn't feel so heavy. It was as though someone had thrown him a lifeline. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was drowning in the flood of injustice and cruelty that had defined his life for so long. But as he stood there, his feet rooted to the sidewalk, The reality of the world he lived in started to creep back in. The city, which had once felt like a place of endless possibilities, now felt more like a battlefield, a place where he was constantly fighting for his dignity, his humanity, just to exist. The thoughts of that officer, the one who had belittled him, called him nothing, still gnawed at him. The sneers and the venomous words echoed in his mind like a constant hum. "You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." The officer's voice rang in his ears like a bell, marking him, labeling him. He had tried to shake it off, but it clung to him like a shadow. The truth was, the boy knew it wasn't just the officer who thought that way. It was the system, it was the world. It was every person who looked at him and saw nothing but the color of his skin. Every time he was assumed guilty before being given a chance to prove himself. Every time he was followed in stores or pushed aside by people who thought they were better than him. The world was a place that had been designed to make people like him feel small. And if he wasn't careful, if he didn't find a way to rise above it all, he would stay small forever. But he wasn't going to let that happen. Not anymore. He had seen the power that came from standing up, from confronting the hate, from refusing to accept the narrative that had been imposed on him for so long. The first time he had thrown that punch, the world hadn't crumbled. Instead, it had shifted. The officer had backed off. He had made a choice in that moment, to fight back, to reclaim what had been taken from him. And it had felt good. So damn good. But now, there was something more. Something deeper. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every black person who had ever been told they were less than. For every person who had been made to feel like they didn't belong. For every person who had been silenced. The fight was bigger than him, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what that meant. But he knew one thing. It was a fight he was willing to take on. The streets were busier now, and the boy walked with purpose. He wasn't sure where he was going, but the rhythm of his steps felt purposeful, like every stride brought him closer to something important. As he walked, he thought back to the woman he had spoken to earlier. He didn't even know her name, but something in the way she had spoken to him, something in her eyes, had lit a fire inside of him. She had reminded him that he wasn't alone, that there was a whole community of people who understood his pain, his struggle. He wasn't the only one carrying this weight, and he wouldn't be the last. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car slowing down beside him. He glanced to his right, and the first thing he saw was the familiar glint of a police badge. The boy froze. The officer in the car stared at him for a moment, his eyes cold, his expression hard. For a moment, the boy's heart skipped a beat, the flash of fear tightening his chest. But then, something inside him shifted. This wasn't a moment to shrink, to cower. This was a moment to stand tall, to face it. The officer rolled down the window, his voice low and commanding. "Where do you think you're going, kid?" The boy didn't respond immediately. He didn't know what to say. He could feel the officer's gaze on him, waiting for him to flinch, to break. But the boy stood his ground, his back straight, his hands loose at his sides. "Answer me," the officer pressed, his voice sharp, demanding respect, as though he had the right to command it. For a split second, the boy almost wanted to snap back, to tell the officer exactly where he could go, but instead, he held his breath, steadying himself. "I'm going wherever I want to go," the boy finally said, his voice quiet but firm. The officer's eyes narrowed, and the boy could see the familiar look of disdain in them, the look that said, "You don't belong here." The officer gave him a cold smile, almost as if amused by the boy's response. "You think you're special, huh?" the officer said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're just another angry little punk trying to play the hero. You think you're going to change things by acting out, by causing trouble? You're just like the rest of them, no better, no different." The words hit hard, but the boy didn't flinch. He didn't let the officer's words rattle him. He had heard it all before, the whispers, the looks, the assumptions. He had spent his whole life being told he didn't matter, that he was less than. But not anymore. "You're wrong," the boy said, his voice steady, unwavering. "I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm just trying to be a person. And that's something you and people like you will never understand." For a moment, the officer said nothing. He just stared at the boy, the disdain on his face fading into something darker, more threatening. Then, after a long, uncomfortable silence, the officer smirked. "You're a problem, kid," he said, rolling up his window, "and I'm going to make sure you remember that." The car sped off, leaving the boy standing in the street, his heart pounding, his fists clenched. The encounter left a bitter taste in his mouth, but he wasn't angry. Not anymore. He was more certain than ever that this fight, this battle for his dignity, for his humanity, was one that had to be fought. And it wasn't just going to be fought on the streets. It was going to be fought in the hearts and minds of every person who had ever been taught to hate him, to see him as less than, to look at him with contempt. It was a fight that would be long and difficult, but it was a fight he was prepared for. As the boy continued down the street, he passed by a group of young black men standing on the corner, laughing and talking. They noticed him and fell silent as he approached. One of them stepped forward, a tall, muscular guy with a face full of scars. "You okay, bro?" he asked, his voice rough but concerned. The boy stopped, nodding slowly. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady. "I'm good, just tired of people thinking they can walk all over me." The man studied him for a moment, his eyes scanning the boy's face, looking for something. Then he nodded. "I feel that," he said. "We've all been through it. Every one of us, but we don't let them break us. We stand tall. We fight back." The boy felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of solidarity, of connection. This wasn't just his fight. It was their fight. Every person who had ever been looked down on, degraded, cast aside. It was their fight. And it was a fight worth fighting. The man clapped the boy on the back. "Keep your head up, kid. You're not in this alone." The boy watched as the group of men continued their conversation, their laughter and chatter filling the air. They weren't just talking about the struggle. They were living it. And in that moment, the boy realized something important. He wasn't alone. And he never had been. As he walked away, he felt a fire in his chest. A fire that burned hotter than any insult, any act of hatred. It was a fire that couldn't be extinguished. Not by them, not by anyone. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to fight back with everything he had. Because he knew one thing for sure. This fire, it would never die. The city seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Streets upon streets of stories, of lives lived in the shadows, hidden from view by a world that only acknowledged the visible, the powerful, the right kind of people. But the boy was learning that everything he had once believed about the world, about himself, about his place in it, was nothing more than a lie. He had been told he didn't belong. He had been told that people like him didn't matter, that the color of his skin would always be a barrier, a wall that separated him from the rest of humanity. But now, with every step he took, the boy felt that wall crumbling. He was done being invisible. He was done being silenced. He wasn't going to accept the hate anymore. He was going to fight back, and not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they were less than. His heart still pounded from the encounter with the officer earlier. The sneer in the officer's eyes still burned in his memory. "You're a problem, kid," the officer had said, as if he had any right to define the boy's worth. But the boy wasn't the problem. He wasn't the one who had created the broken system that bred hatred and injustice. He was just one of the casualties, one of the countless people who had suffered under its weight. But not anymore. He walked through the streets, his mind churning with anger, with purpose. The sun was beginning to set, casting the city in an orange glow, but the boy didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The fire inside of him was burning too bright. It was no longer just about fighting back against the officer, against the people who had put him in his place. It was about tearing down the system that had kept him and people like him in chains for so long. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew it would take everything he had, but he was ready. And as he walked, he could feel the eyes of the city on him, some filled with disdain, others with fear, some with admiration. The world was watching. He could feel it. They all wanted to see what he would do next. He didn't know how long he had been walking when he came upon a group of people gathered in the park. It wasn't unusual. The park was a place where people came to hang out, to relax, to escape from the noise of the city. But there was something different about this crowd. The energy was charged, like the air just before a storm. The boy slowed as he approached, his eyes scanning the group. There were people of all ages, all races, standing together in a loose circle. Some were talking, others were listening, but they all had one thing in common. They were united. And then he saw her. The woman who had spoken to him earlier. She was standing in the center of the group, speaking with a passion that seemed to electrify the air around her. Her words were sharp, urgent, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "We're tired of being told we don't matter," she was saying, her voice carrying over the crowd. "We're tired of being silenced, of being pushed aside, of being treated like we're less than. We are more than our skin color. We are more than the lies they've told us. It's time for us to stand up and show them who we really are. It's time to take back what's been taken from us." The boy felt a surge of emotion rise in his chest. He wasn't the only one who had felt the sting of rejection, of degradation, of being told he was nothing. The words resonated in his bones. He wasn't the only one. There were others, many others, who had been forced to live in the margins, who had been told they didn't belong. And now, they were finally standing together. He stepped forward, his steps steady but hesitant. He wasn't sure what he was doing here, but he knew one thing for sure. This was where he needed to be. The woman saw him approaching and gave him a nod, as if she had been waiting for him. Her eyes were full of understanding, of recognition. She knew why he was here. She knew what he had been through, and she knew that he was ready. "You're not alone," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough for him to hear. "We're all fighting the same fight." The boy nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. He had spent so much of his life holding his tongue, staying silent, watching the world pass him by as others dictated his worth. But now, here, in this moment, with these people, he could feel the power of their unity. It was a power he had never known before. It was a power that could change the world. "You're right," he finally said, his voice low but sure. "We are all fighting the same fight." The woman smiled, her eyes sparkling with something akin to hope. She stepped aside, making room for him in the circle. The boy didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. But for the first time in his life, the weight didn't feel crushing. It felt like a responsibility, a purpose. As the crowd quieted, the woman began to speak again, her words full of conviction. "This isn't just about us. This isn't just about the Black community, the Latinx community, or any one group of people. This is about all of us, people of color, working class people, anyone who has been pushed to the margins. It's time for us to come together, to demand that we be seen, that we be heard. We've been silenced for too long, and we're not going to take it anymore." The crowd erupted into applause, their voices rising in unison, a wave of sound that filled the park and reverberated through the streets. The boy felt a fire ignite in his chest, a fire that had been smoldering for years, but now, in this moment, it was alive, burning bright. He was part of something bigger, something that couldn't be ignored. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged. Not because the world had accepted him, but because he had accepted himself. He wasn't just the angry black kid anymore. He was a force. He was a part of something that could not be stopped. As the crowd began to chant, their voices echoing in the night air, the boy felt a sense of unity wash over him. He wasn't alone, and neither were they. They were together, standing strong, standing tall, refusing to be invisible any longer. "We matter!" the crowd shouted. "We matter!" The boy joined in, his voice rising with the others, louder than he had ever spoken before. "We matter!" It was a small step, but it was a step. And it was a step that would lead to something much bigger. He didn't know exactly what would happen next. He didn't know if this was the beginning of something that could change the world. But he knew that this was the beginning of something important. The fire inside him was burning hotter than ever, and he wasn't about to let it die. He wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The night was heavy with the echoes of the crowd's chants. "We matter!" they had shouted together, their voices reverberating through the park and into the streets. The boy stood in the middle of it all, feeling the pulse of unity, of strength, surging through him. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider, like someone the world had cast aside. He felt powerful, like he was part of something that couldn't be ignored. But as the crowd began to disperse, the energy slowly fading as people drifted off into the night, the boy couldn't shake the thought that had been gnawing at the back of his mind. They had come together for one night, for one moment, but what came next? What would happen when the world went back to pretending they didn't matter? As the last of the group began to leave, the woman from earlier, the one who had spoken with such fire, approached him again. Her expression was thoughtful now, as though she too was processing what had just happened. "You did well tonight," she said quietly, her voice no longer full of the urgency it had been moments before. "But this is just the beginning. This isn't going to be easy. The world doesn't like it when we stand up for ourselves. It likes us to stay quiet, to stay in our place, and when we don't, they'll come after us. The question is, are you ready for that?" The boy looked at her, unsure how to answer. He wanted to say yes, to tell her that he was ready for whatever came next, but the truth was, he didn't know. He didn't know if he was strong enough to take on the world that had been built to crush him. The fear, the doubt, started to creep in again, like a weight pressing down on his chest. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I know I can't keep living the way I have. I can't keep letting them make me feel like I don't matter. Like I'm nothing." The woman nodded, her eyes hard with understanding. "We've all felt that way. But you know what? We're not nothing. We're powerful. We just have to believe that. And we have to make the world believe it too." Her words settled over him like a blanket, warming him in the cold night air. For the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they could actually make a difference. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But there was a fire inside him now, and he wasn't about to let it go out. "I'll fight," he said, his voice more certain now. "I'll fight for us." The woman smiled, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "Good, because this fight isn't just about us. It's about all the people who have been hurt, all the people who have been silenced. It's about making sure that the next generation doesn't have to grow up the way we did. We can't let the system keep doing this to us." Her words echoed in his mind as he walked away from the park, his footsteps slow, deliberate. The streets felt different now. The same concrete and pavement he had walked for years now felt like a battleground, like the very earth beneath him was charged with the energy of something greater than him. He could hear the faint hum of the city around him, the distant sounds of people going about their business, unaware of the revolution that had just begun. But as he walked, he could already sense the resistance creeping back into his life. The world wasn't going to just let him walk away from it all. It wasn't going to let him change things without fighting back. He could already feel the eyes on him, the judgment, the contempt, the fear. The world didn't like people like him standing up for themselves. It didn't like people challenging the way things had always been. And he knew that sooner or later, it was going to come for him. As he turned a corner, he saw a familiar face ahead. It was the officer, the one who had humiliated him before. The boy's heart skipped a beat, his body tensed, ready for a confrontation. But as he took in the officer's stance, his eyes narrowed with something darker, something more dangerous. The officer was no longer just a symbol of oppression. He was a person, someone who had directly impacted the boy's life, who had tried to break him. And now, the boy wasn't going to let him walk away. The officer's eyes locked on him as he approached. He recognized the boy immediately. His face twisted into a sneer, as if he was ready to laugh. But there was something in his eyes that told the boy this wasn't going to be the same encounter. This wasn't just a random stop anymore. "You again," the officer said, his voice thick with disdain. "Didn't learn your lesson last time?" The boy didn't flinch. He stood tall, his back straight, his hands at his sides. He wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't going to be intimidated by this man. this symbol of the system that had always tried to keep him down. "I didn't ask for your lesson," the boy said, his voice calm but firm. "But I've learned one thing from it. I'm not your punching bag, and I'm not going to let people like you walk all over me." The officer's sneer deepened, and he took a step forward, his eyes glinting with menace. "You think you can talk to me like that? You think you're anything? You're just another piece of trash on the streets. Nothing more, nothing less." The boy's chest tightened. He could feel the old hatred rising inside him. That familiar sting, the sting of being told he didn't matter. He had heard it all before. It wasn't just this officer. It was the world. It was everyone who had ever looked at him and seen nothing but a black face, a statistic, a problem. It was everyone who had ever tried to break him, but he wasn't going to let them break him anymore. "No!" the boy said, his voice firm now, cutting through the officer's words like a knife. "I'm not nothing. You can try to make me feel small, but it's not going to work, because I'm not going anywhere, and neither are the people like me." The officer stepped closer, his face inches from the boy's. "You think you're a hero? You're just a kid playing with fire. And when you get burned, don't come crying to me." The boy didn't back down. He stood his ground, feeling the power of his words fill the air around him. "Maybe you're right," he said, his voice low. "Maybe I'm playing with fire. But you know what? Fire can burn, but it can also light the way. And I'm done letting you and people like you keep me in the dark." The officer hesitated, the tension thick in the air, but the boy didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. He just stood there, letting his words sink in, letting the officer feel the weight of what he had said. Finally, the officer took a step back, his face dark with rage. "This isn't over," he growled, his voice low and threatening. The boy nodded, his eyes unwavering. "I know, but I'm not backing down." With that, the officer turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the street. The boy stood there for a moment, his heart racing, his mind spinning. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He was done being afraid. As he watched the officer disappear into the night, the boy realized something. This wasn't just about one officer, one encounter, one fight. This was bigger than that. This was about everything. It was about the system, about the hate, about the way the world had been built to keep people like him down. And he wasn't going to let it continue. Not now, not ever. He wasn't alone, and together they were going to change everything. The city had a way of making you feel small, of drowning you in its noise and chaos, like a river that wouldn't stop flowing. It was easy to get lost in it, to feel like your voice would never rise above the hum of everything else. But the boy wasn't lost anymore. He had found something within himself, something stronger than the world that had tried to silence him for so long. He had found a purpose, a cause that was bigger than himself, bigger than the hatred that had followed him his entire life. The air was thick with tension as the boy walked through the streets that had once felt like a prison, but now felt like a battleground. Every step he took was a reminder of the fight he had chosen. The fight wasn't just his. It was for everyone who had ever been told they didn't matter. It was for every person who had been knocked down, degraded, humiliated, just because of who they were. And he wasn't going to let that continue. Tonight was different. It had been building for weeks now. The protests, the demonstrations, the voices rising up against the oppression that had been suffocating them all for too long. It had all led to this moment, and the boy could feel the electricity in the air. He wasn't the only one who had felt the rage, the sense of betrayal, the desire for change. The streets were filled with people now, thousands of them, marching together, shoulder to shoulder, united in their demand for justice. As he stood in the crowd, he could feel the pulse of their collective anger, the weight of their shared history, their shared pain. It was like nothing he had ever felt before. The fire that had been burning inside him was now a flame that spread to everyone around him. This wasn't just a protest. This was a movement. This was the beginning of something that would shake the very foundation of the world they lived in. But even as the crowd chanted, their voices rising in a chorus of defiance, the boy couldn't ignore the nagging doubt in his chest. This wasn't going to be easy. The world didn't like to be challenged. It didn't like to be told it was wrong. And when people like him stood up, when people like them demanded change, the world fought back. The officers, the system, the people who had been profiting from this broken system, they weren't going to let them take it from them without a fight. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable, like the calm before a storm. And then, as if on cue, the sirens blared in the distance. The boy's heart raced. He had seen it before. The way the authorities would respond to people who dared to speak out, who dared to demand their rights. It wasn't peace. It wasn't dialogue. It was violence. It was oppression. The first officer appeared in front of the crowd, his uniform stark against the night. His face was hard, impassive, as though he had seen this all before. He didn't see the people. He didn't see the rage, the hope, the pain. He saw only a threat. His hand rested on his baton, his eyes scanning the crowd like a predator waiting for its prey. The boy's eyes locked on the officers, and for a brief moment, everything else seemed to fade away. There was no noise, no movement, just the two of them, separated by the mass of people, but connected by the hatred that pulsed through the air. "Move along, people," the officer barked. "You're blocking traffic. Get back to your homes." The boy's fists clenched, his breath sharp in his throat. This was the same officer, the one who had humiliated him, the one who had tried to break him. But now, standing here, in this moment, he felt a calm that surprised him. He wasn't afraid anymore. This wasn't just about him. It was about all of them. And he wasn't going to let them be silenced again. The crowd didn't move. They stood their ground, their voices rising in unison. "No justice, no peace," they chanted, their voices like a wave crashing against the shore. And then it happened. The officer's hand shot out, and with a single motion, he reached for his baton. The boy's heart skipped a beat. He saw the officer's hand move toward him, and in that moment, he knew what was coming. The world had always been like this, a cycle of violence, of people like him being treated like animals. But he wasn't an animal, and he wasn't going to let them treat him like one anymore. Before the officer could make his move, the boy stepped forward, his voice loud and clear. "We are not going anywhere. We are standing here for justice. We are standing here for our rights." The crowd erupted, their voices rising in defiance, filling the air with a sound that was both deafening and powerful. The officer hesitated, his grip on his baton tightening, but he didn't make a move. The tension hung in the air like a live wire, crackling with anticipation. Then, without warning, the officers began to advance, their batons raised, their faces hard with determination. It was like a wall of authority, moving in perfect synchrony, ready to crush the movement beneath their boots. The boy didn't move. He stood his ground, his chest rising and falling with each breath, his eyes fixed on the officer who had caused him so much pain. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. But just as the officers were about to close in, something shifted. A woman stepped out of the crowd, her voice steady and powerful. "Enough!" she shouted, her arms raised to the sky. "We will not be silenced. We will not back down. We are here to stay." The crowd fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The boy watched as the woman, fearless and resolute, stood between the officers and the people. It was as if the air itself had shifted, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. For a long moment, nothing happened. And then, in a surprising turn, the officers lowered their batons. The tension in the air began to dissipate, like steam escaping from a pressure cooker. The crowd's voices grew louder, chanting in unison once more. "No justice! No peace!" The boy's heart was pounding in his chest. But now, it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, something that felt like victory. It wasn't over, not yet. But in this moment, they had won. They had made their stand. They had refused to be silenced. And as the boy stood there, amidst the chants and the crowd, he realized that this wasn't just a protest. This wasn't just a fleeting moment. This was a revolution. It was a revolution of the mind, of the spirit, of the heart. It was a revolution that said they were more than the hate that had been poured into them. It was a revolution that said they mattered. As the night wore on and the crowd began to disperse, the boys stood there, feeling the weight of what had just happened. It wasn't over. The fight wasn't over. There would be more battles to fight, more injustice to confront. But now, he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer alone. They were all in this together, and nothing could ever break them again. He wasn't the angry black kid anymore. He was a part of something bigger, something that could change the world, and the world was going to have to listen. Thank you for following this journey with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What did it make you feel? Have you ever experienced something similar in your life, perhaps facing racism or unfair treatment? Your experiences are important to us, and we truly value every one of you. Please take a moment to leave a comment and let us know your perspective. If you enjoyed this story, consider liking it and subscribing to stay updated with our future content. Your support means the world to us. Wishing you a wonderful day ahead. And if you've listened to the end, leave a comment with the phrase, "We rise together," so we know you're with us all the way.